based on our dry run. If you have any questions, pop them into the chat. And Adam will be monitoring them. All right, let's get started then. So welcome to the SITS SharePoint Community of Practice, Session 2 on Sites. Our last session was on June 5th. It was quite a while ago, and we have not met our objective of having these every month yet. But we're hoping that now that the migrations have died down a bit, that we will be able to start doing that every month. Our SharePoint Community of Practice site is up at this location, so in the shared area to the community practice area under SharePoint. So welcome. This session is recorded. The video and slide deck will be available at that site, the community practice site on SharePoint. Audience is muted, and please post any questions to the link conversation, and we'll give answers at the end of the presentation. To reiterate the purpose of the SITS SharePoint Community of Practice, the plan is that we're going to share information on appropriate use of the SharePoint in the ministry, steward, develop, and nurture SharePoint knowledge and best practices, and gather feedback from you to enhance the use of SharePoint wherever we can. The format will be in a webinar style, online only and recorded. We're definitely going to try and do monthly from this point forward, and we're going to do deep dives into specific topics as we go through. Things like lists and libraries, items, documents. Today we're doing sites. Last session was on permissions, if you want to go and review that. And of course, if you have any topics that you would like to see or any feedback, we are listening. We would like to hear from you. So the scope of today's session, we're going to talk about what is a site, when should you use a site, how do you set up a site, and how do you manage a site. There's lots to learn about sites, so we'll get right into it. We're not going to talk about how to close down a site. We'll do that in another session where we talk about the whole records management process and everything else, how we decommission a site. So we have some common understandings. Let's talk about the hierarchy of SharePoint. At the very top level is the farm. And it contains all the collections that are used by government. And for us, that is managed by Messaging and Collaboration Services, and they provision the SharePoint collections to us. A collection is a collection of sites, and that is managed by a site collection administrator. And in our 2016 SharePoint environment, that is the site collection administrators in Information Management Branch, and that is Adam Spiteri and myself, Scott Toes. Below the collection level are sites, and these are a collection of pages, apps, configurations, features, content types, subsites, and a few other things. And they are managed by a site owner. So that's site owner comes from the business, and they are the person that runs the sites. And within sites, you'll have apps. That's what Microsoft is calling them now. And basically, that's lists and libraries and other functionality. And typically, those are managed by the site owner, or optionally, they might have a list manager that they assign responsibility to those things. The other two things that you might hear about are root site and subsite. And what's the difference? Well, first of all, both root sites and subsites are sites. And the root site is the very top site of a collection. And each collection must contain at least a root site. Typically, that also contains resources used by all sites within the collection, such as the style library, some site assets, and that kind of thing. And for a SITS environment, for all of our collections, that top root site is managed by IMB, and it's open read-only to all IDER accounts so that they have access to what they need in order to use the subsites. And then, of course, a subsite is any site that is underneath another site, which is pretty much every other site in the collections. We have in our ministry a collection for each division, plus one that is shared by all that has more front-facing type content in it. We also have a development and user acceptance testing that we use in IMB for developing content and functionality for SharePoint. We use some symbols and meanings throughout the slides here. If you see a green check mark, that means if you have basic site owner knowledge, you can proceed to go ahead and use that topic or item or feature or whatever we're talking about without too much worries about screwing things up or not understanding it. If you see the yellow exclamation mark, that one means that you have a little more caution. You'll need a little bit more knowledge to be effective with that and basically proceed with caution. The do not enter sign in red means don't use that. It may be because it causes problems, or it might be because it's a feature or an item that is not available for us. If you see a little person icon, that means that whatever you're doing there is going to affect users in some way. And the magnifying glass means that it's going to affect how the search works in some way, or your search results. Site owners have some tasks when it comes to sites. And on an annual basis, they'll be doing a security review. Semi-annual tasks, they should be archiving any old content. Best way to find the needle in a haystack is to reduce the size of a haystack. The next thing is daily tasks. So they manage content on a daily basis. And then ad hoc tasks, meaning whenever, wherever. They troubleshoot problems for users. They are the first line of defense for users who need help with a site. They'll also escalate any issues up to us in IMB so we can help out, and any information that needs to be communicated to the users that will be the route taken. They may also set up apps such as lists and libraries and calendars and such things, and any subsites that are needed. They'll also grant and remove access as required, and if a user accidentally deletes something, they will have a task of restoring it from the recycle bin. So the first question is, when should you use SharePoint? Well, first of all, keep in mind that the point of SharePoint is to share. So if you want to share information with outside people who don't have access to your LAN, for example, or you want to collaborate with people who don't have access to your LAN, then those are big pluses to using SharePoint. If, on the other hand, you are thinking that you want to archive old documents, or you want an intranet or an extranet kind of thing, Or if you want a relational databases, those are reasons not to use SharePoint. And in fact, you should be using some other alternatives such as Trim, the LAN, intranet, or databases. And once you've decided that you're going to use SharePoint, then you need to know, well, when should I use a site and when should I use something else? Well, if you have multiple apps, such as lists, libraries, and those kind of things that are all related to each other, or you want to have unique permissions, or you want to have a different site owner or business owner than the parent, or if you want to use a different set of site features, then those are all reasons why you would lean towards using a site. Whereas if you have only want a single app, like for example, you just need a place to store documents, or you're going to be using the same permissions as the parent, you're going to have the same business owner and site owners, and everything is related to everything else that's in a site, then you should use an alternative like a list or a library, calendar, or even maybe just a web page. And of course, there are other alternatives in SharePoint that are available that aren't listed here. When you go to create a site, you're going to be asked to choose a site template. And 99% of the time, you're going to use a team site. And this will set up everything that you need to do the things you need to do. The things to remember about templates is that that's just what they are, is templates. They are the starting point of your site. So this is going to give you a specific set of features and lists and libraries by default when you create it. And from there, you can customize it however you want. So just because you start with a team site doesn't mean that you can't have Power Pivot stuff on there or projects or anything like that. They can be all turned on with features or specific lists or libraries as needed. The blog, Power Pivot site, and project site and community site are all, you could use those, but you probably want a little bit more knowledge about what they do exactly before you commit to them. There are also some other site templates that can be made, and these are under the advertising and publishing tab. When we get there, you'll see those. And they should be not used unless you consult with us. Some of the enterprise ones are meant to only be one of those sites per collection, and some of the publishing sites require a little bit more in-depth knowledge before you can get into them. That's about it for site templates. All right, and so here are the steps to create a site. And so rather than bore you with reading this off, I thought I would show you, and we're going to create a site together. So I'm just going to flip over to my site here. So I'm in the UAT environment right now, and the first step is to click on the gear up here and then go to site contents. And when I get to this page, here's all my apps, my lists and libraries. And if I scroll down, here's all the subsites that already exist. And I have a button here or a link here to click on for a new subsite. And then it's going to ask me for some information. So the title is best to be under 50 characters. This is for humans to use. And so what you put here doesn't matter so much as long as it's understandable to humans. Description, usually you want to be less than 255 characters here. And what's the business reason for the site? This information is going to help users to decide whether or not this site is where they want to put their stuff. So, and place, play, and learn about SharePoint. Okay. Both of these things will also affect search in that if you were to search for Sandbox, this would be returned in the search results. The web site address, this is for the computer, and it shows up in the top level here after you put it in here. You should be doing at least or less than 8 characters if possible, because if you get a URL that's too long, and when you start putting in lists and libraries and folders and document names and stuff, you can get URLs that are very long. And once you bump up against the 255 character limit, you won't be able to access your content. Use letters or numbers or end numbers. Underscores and dashes are okay, but do not use any spaces or any other characters. And the reason for that is you can't have a space in a URL. And so what happens is that it automatically gets converted to or encoded into HTML, and the space becomes a %20, and that's what's put into your URL. And now you've just added 3 extra characters to your URL, and it is not very readable at that point. So I'm just going to put sandbox here. I like to use camel case, which means that I capitalize every word, but leave no spaces. My template is going to be a team site, just because 99% of the time, that's what I'm going to be using, and that has what I need. The user permissions, you have a choice of using the same permissions as the parent site or using unique permissions. If you choose unique permissions, then after we submit this, you will get another page where you can set up the permissions for it. In this case, I'm going to use the same permissions because I want to show you another way of getting there later on. And then we'll fill out that page then. Last thing they're going to ask here is, should you use the top link bar from the parent site? And your answer should always be yes, unless you have a super duper excellent business case for saying no. This top link bar is this one along here, and what we're going for is a shared experience where everybody has the same top bar here. And then click create, and your site will be created. After a moment or two. And we're going to come back to this in a moment. We're just going to flip to our next slide. We're going to look at some site settings momentarily in our new site. We will look at users and permissions, except we're not going to look at site app permissions because that's in-depth stuff that we're going to get into later. We'll look at site administration, some of it, and some site actions. Everything else on the site settings page are deep enough that they warrant their own sessions at a later date. So we'll get into those at some other time, especially things around the look and feel and search and that kind of stuff. So let's start with user permissions. So people and groups presents the default group for the site. Some groups are listed on the left nav. More link. Yeah, let's just go and look at that. So if I go up here and go to site settings and then site permissions, you can see we have here a list of the groups and that have access to this site. This yellow bar has some interesting information that you should always check out when you check out permissions. So for example, first of all, you can see some content on this site has different permissions from what you see here. So if I show items, it'll show that my microfeed has different permissions, and that's you can view the exceptions here. By the way, that microfeed is fine if it has exceptions. That's part of the native functionality that's available in the new 2016 SharePoint. There are limited access users on this site. Users who have limited access of an item or document shared has been basically they have access to something below here at some point but they don't have necessarily access to this. You can check out the permissions session that we had last time. The recording of it's on the site to learn more about that. This website inherits permissions from its parents, and that's telling you where it's coming from. And we have people awaiting approval so that they can access this site. So there's another way to get to those. But what I wanted to do here is I want to stop inheriting permissions. This is what you'll do sometimes. And so we're going to stop inheriting permissions, and it's going to say, you're going to stop this. So you want to make sure that you do this. What's going to happen when I stop inheriting is that it's going to break the connection between this and the parent. That means that it will not remove any permissions here. All the permissions that you see here will continue to be here, but any changes made to the parent will not be reflected here, and vice versa. Any changes made here will not be reflected in the parent. So they'll be out of sync. So do that. And this is where it's going to ask you to set up your groups for this site. When you create the site, if you chose unique permissions, this is the page you would go to afterwards. Now you can use an existing group that's existing within the collection, or you can create a new group. Most of the time, you're going to want to create new groups for your sites. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create new groups, and we have a naming convention. So you can see that this URL up here, we're under sites, we have UAT Sandbox, that's our site. So we're going to change this to be UAT Sandbox, and then I like to have a space in that name. And visitors, meaning people who have read access, and members, for members who have contribute access, and then owners, the people who can access, who run the site. Now this owners group will also be made the owner of this group and this group, which will then allow them to grant access later on. And I'm just going to remove myself from the members site, and I'm going to add in my boss. And hit the check for persons, and it should come back momentarily with her fully registered name. There we are. And then I'm just going to hit OK. And that's going to apply permissions. And what that's going to do is that's going to take these 3 new groups, create them, and grant them access to so anyway, we'll go back to the permissions. And here we are. You can see we've got the new permissions here. And I'm just going to remove all these other permissions so that we only have the people that I wanted to have access to have this permission. I'm getting messages here. And okay, so now we've got permissions. The other thing that I wanted to show here, oh, next slide, I guess. Oh, I think I did these out of order. Oh, that's too bad. We're on this one. So here's stop heading permissions. There's more ribbons here. So let's just talk about these ribbons for the moment. We can delete unique permissions, which will resync these back. So these people will lose permissions because we customized them, and the parent will be then reinstated here. We don't want to do that. Grant permission allows us to go ahead and add other groups or other people. We can create new groups here. If we check a person here, we can edit their permissions. So for example, members currently have edit permissions, and I decide, no, that's not what I want. I don't want them to have edit. I want them to have contribute. So I can click on that and change that, and now they have contribute access. I can also remove user permissions, so I can just remove members if I wanted to. And then the big thing that you want to know about is this check permission. So you can come in here, any site, any list, any item, document, whatever. If you're looking at the permissions, and you can go in here and you can say, what does Wanda have for permissions in this site? So I can check now, and I can see she has limited access through these groups, and she has contribute through this group, which is the group I added her to originally. I can also put somebody else in here, like for example, if I put Julia, and I check her, she has limited access for those two, but otherwise she has no access. So now I know if she's supposed to have access, what the problem is. The last thing I want to show here is the access request settings. And this is whether or not I allow other people to request access. So for example, if Wanda wanted to grant access or wanted Julia to access documents on this site, she could click on the share button up here and share it, put Julia's name in there, and then a request would go to the site owners to grant access to Julia. And then this button allows people to request that they get access denied, and it will be sent to this email address. And we recommend that you put a generic email address, not a specific person's name. And the reason for that is that if this person moves on and is no longer the owner of this group or this site, they'll still receive the emails regardless of what permissions they actually have. So if they move on, you need to update the email, or better yet, use a mailbox, shared mailbox for that. All right. And let's just talk briefly about permission levels. This is the various levels that you can assign people and what they can do within the site. And I'll let you look at that at your leisure. Yeah. Let's talk about the peoples and groups, which I did in the wrong order here. So let's go site groups and people and groups. And as you can see, my members group is the default one that's listed here. I have a bunch on the left here that are listed. I can go more, and this will show me all of the groups within the collection. And I can go to settings, edit the quick launch, and I can go in here and say, okay, well, I don't want this one, so I'll just go and press delete on that, or that one. UAT owners, no. User set, no. No, no, no. No. But UAT owners, members, and visitors, yes. For this site, those are the ones I want to see quickly. So when I hit OK, you can now see that they're the ones on the left here. And so I can just flip through them and not have to have a big list of groups that I don't care about for this particular site. All right. Good. Now let's talk about the recycle bin. From time to time, you may get a request from a user who said, oops, I deleted something. I need to get something out of the recycle bin. So let me first grab a document off of my desktop. I should have a document, Jelly Belly document. I'll just drop it in there. All right, so if I go, now I put it in there, so now I'm going to go here and I'm just going to, 4 arrows, delete it, and it's going to go to the recycle bin. Oops, I accidentally deleted it. What do? Site owner can go into the site contents. Up here we have a recycle bin. Here's my Jelly Belly document, and I can go in here, click that, and restore it back to the library. So now if I go to the site contents and look at my documents library, there it is, back all safe and sound. There we go. All right, so site administration. So in the site administration area, which we'll just show you quickly. So this is back on the site settings, site pages here, our site settings page. This is the site administration area. The regional settings, site output cache, term store management, content and structure, site variation settings, translation status, all of those we recommend that you don't touch. For most part, you won't need to do anything with them. The only one that could potentially be helpful to you is the content and structure. It is a legacy way of accessing your sites and content from back pre-2007 SharePoint. And unfortunately, it does have the potential of allowing you to do things that will mess up your sites. So we recommend you don't use it. The other items, there's no need to use them. The term store management, in fact, you can't use because you need special permissions outside of the collection in order to use it. And in the other things that we'll be covering in other sessions are things like the user alerts, RSS, workflow settings, managing catalog connections, and site closure and deletion. But what we will talk about in this section is the site libraries and lists. That will present a list of all libraries and sites. So recall we went to the site contents and that showed everything, but so does which one did we say? Site libraries and lists. There we go. And so it shows all of the all the lists and libraries that we have in this site, and it will take you right to the settings page of that list or library from there. We also have the sites and workspaces, which will do the same thing, except for subsites and workspaces and meeting spaces. And you can create subsites from right here as well. This will also show the description, last modified date, and links to delete the subsite if you so desire. This will be handy when you are reviewing subsites to see when the last time something was modified, so you know whether or not it's time to clean it up and put it away. And then the last thing I want to talk about in this section is popularity trends. And a lot of people are missing the analytics for SharePoint that's no longer available in 2016. But this might help a little bit in that you can run a report that will tell you the usage. Actually, you know what? I'm going to cancel that, and I'm going to go up a level to the UAT area, and we'll run it there because our new sandbox is not going to have any information about it at all in there because nobody's using it yet. So where did it go? Oh, just lost it here. Popularity trends, there we are. So if I run this usage report, and I can open, and it's going to give me an Excel spreadsheet, which is going to tell me about my site. So it's going to tell me the day, how many hits I got, how many unique users, and it's going to give me a graph for that same thing. It's also going to go by month. So you can see the last few months we've had quite a few hits on this thing. Because prior to that, of course, we didn't have one. We didn't have this site. So that's another way of getting your analytics for the site. It doesn't do specific pages or anything like that, but at least it tells you for your site whether or not it's being used. All right, site actions. So there are a bunch of site actions. So we can manage site features, such as activating or deactivating site features, and we're going to talk about those in a moment. You can reset the site definition to reset a specific or a customized page to its original definition. This is useful if you have customized the site page in some way, usually through SharePoint Designer or something like that, and you want to set it back to its original factory setting, if you will. You can use that on there. And then lastly, you can delete sites here and send it to the recycle bin. Note that when you try to do that, if your site has subsites, it cannot be deleted. And so let me just go back into my sandbox here. Sandbox. And we'll just look at that. This is the site actions area right here. So those are the things that are on there. Site features. There are a number of features, so let's just talk about site features. So manage site features. Here's your list of features in your site. There are several that are okay to use. You may use them at any time. In fact, some are turned on by default, but others you'll have to turn on manually if you want to do it. Use them. So there's community site feature. There is the getting started, which is turned on by default, I think, when you create a new site. Metadata navigation and filtering allows you to set up some tree views and that kind of thing that will allow you to change how the navigation works on the left-hand side. Mobile browser view, I think that's turned on by default. Offline synchronization for external lists. For some of you, you might find that nice to synchronize a list between SharePoint and an Excel spreadsheet. Server enterprise site features, I think that's turned on by default. SharePoint Server Publishing, we turn that on by default, or we turn that on for all our subsites so that they get to use the advantages of our custom master page. We'll talk about that in a moment when I show you the demo on that. Standard site features, site feed, site notebook, these are all things that you can turn on or are already turned on. There are some features that you could use cautiously if you have some knowledge about them, because some of them take some in-depth knowledge, like the Business Intelligence Center, for example, or the interoperability services. Hold is a records thing. Like, there's a bunch of them here, and I'm not going to get too deep into them at this point. And then features you should not use. So first of all is access services. You may see it listed there. Turning it on will do nothing because access services is turned off at the farm level. And this is to match the experience that you would receive for SharePoint Online for when we eventually do that. Don't know how long that's going to be or anything like that, but it is a recommendation from Microsoft that you don't use it. Announcement tiles is not turned on. Following content is turned on by default. However, it doesn't work because it relies on having OneDrive enabled, and OneDrive is not enabled on the farm level. And so the experience that a user will get is not good, and I'll show you an example of that momentarily. Minimal download strategy, we recommend you turn that off. It's turned on by default, and that is how it does the URL. It's supposed to allow faster downloads of the site. However, our experience has been that it makes no difference with our sites. That might be different if we were using a multimedia heavy site that would, like an intranet or an extranet, but since we're not using SharePoint for that, it shouldn't be needed. But what it does do is it makes the URL not very readable. So we decided to turn it off on our sites. And the last thing you shouldn't use is the site mailbox, although that sounds like a really cool feature. Unfortunately, our version of Exchange is not new enough to be able to take advantage of that, so it won't work. So let me just flip over to the site features here. Now, we got here by going to the gear, site settings, manage site features, and when you create a new site, there are three that you're going to want to take a look at. The first is the following content. It gives you this button right here, this follow, and if you can see, if I click on that, it says, unfortunately, it looks like your account because we don't have OneDrive. So what you want to do is you want to deactivate that one and confirm, and that'll take away that button so your users aren't going to be having a problem with that. Second one you want to do is deactivate the minimal download strategy, and that will take care of that. And then the last one you want to do is activate the SharePoint Server Publishing so that our custom master page will be applied, and that will give you a few more benefits that we've done. For example, the sliding in and out of the left here, and also the Contact Us button, which popped up here, that will be helpful. Now you'll notice that my menu here is a little screwed up, and that has to do with, I'm just going to go back to site settings. Oh, breadcrumb trail is another benefit of our master page. And if you go into navigation, it should always be, the global navigation should display the parent. Current navigation should be structural. We like to turn on the show subsites, turn off the show pages, and uncheck these two. These are the two things that are screwing up this right there. And then just click on OK. We will get that fixed for future. We'll figure out what's causing that. But there we have the nice thing there. And then if I go to my Sandbox home, I now have a nice new site all ready to go. All right. How to troubleshoot. So we'll give you a couple of tips on how to troubleshoot. The first is there an error message? For example, if you get an HTTP 404, that means the URL that you're using is incorrect. It's not pointing to something that exists. So it's possibly a broken link, or the other one that we're experiencing right now is if you're set to migrate and you haven't been migrated yet and you try and click on the new link, it's obviously not going to work because it doesn't exist yet. If instead you get an access denied, that means that it's a permissions issue and you need to check your permission. And that could mean checking permissions on document libraries or sites or a bunch of other things. So you'll need to look at that. Second step, is the problem recreatable in Internet Explorer? So if you are experiencing a problem and you're using Chrome, Firefox, or Edge, or Opera, or something else that's strange that's not Internet Explorer, try doing it again in Internet Explorer, and that could probably fix the problem. There is some functionality in SharePoint that it just don't work in Chrome, Firefox, Edge, and other browsers. Next thing is figure out, is someone else having the same problem? That helps us determine if the problem is SharePoint or if it's specific to a user account. If you are an end user, use the Contact Us link on the top right corner of your page, or look up your site owner in the Shared Programs SharePoint support site. And if you are a site owner and can't solve a problem, send the detailed steps to recreate the issue and a screenshot, hopefully, to the SITS SP support mailbox. And we can help you troubleshoot it. Next steps. We will post this video and the deck to the SITS SP COP site. Link is in the invite to this meeting. We want to hear your feedback on this session. What did you like? What did you didn't like? Is there something else that you would like us to deep dive into? Next month, we plan on deep diving into document libraries. So that'll be a lot of fun, how to use document libraries. And of course, if you have any questions or feedback, send us an email. And now we will go to questions. So Adam, are there any questions?
Yeah, well, no, not technically. There's one question that said, Christina Curry said, will the instructions Scott is going through now be available? I just said we're going to post a how-to doc to, instructions that you went over, basically like how to turn on site features and which ones to turn on. But it's in the slide deck as well.
It's in the slide deck, yeah, and it will be posted to the site, as will the video for this.
Okay, and then Shauna Lamming said, hi, I'm wondering about web parts. There's going to be a session on that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It'll be a little bit yet. We want to get into libraries next, because that's the next logical thing that people use most of. We may have a session about lists after that. And then after that, I think we're planning on items and documents and that kind of thing. And then after that, I think is when we're going to get into web parts, because that's where you start using those lists and libraries and setting up site pages and that kind of thing.
And there's also, we'll probably go with the default web parts first and then go to the custom ones. There's multiple web parts in SharePoint. Yep. Unfortunately, I don't think we would have the time to go through all of them in one session, but you get the basic idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so she said if we need access or assistance, so you would contact the SP support if you're a SharePoint owner, which I'm assuming you are.
The site owner, yeah. If you're not, then contact your site owner, and they'll contact us if they can't help you.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Is there any more questions? No.
All right.
I guess not.
About 45 minutes. Excellent. So thanks for participating, and we will be having another one of these in about a month on the document libraries, maybe lists as well. It depends how much content we need. And we are also lobbying, and anybody out there who wants to lobby on our behalf, of putting on a session at university. So any support for that would be much helpful. All right. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for showing up, and talk to you later.
You bet.
Suzanne, how we know when the next one is?
Oh, well, for the next one, if you haven't signed up at the Community of Practice site, then send an email to us at the support site email saying you want to join the COP, and we'll add you in there, and you will get an invite the next time we'll go on there. Plus, we'll be updating the site somehow when we figure it out to advertise this as well.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.